Hey, party people, good afternoon, and welcome to today's CATHETA webinar, live on September 27th. For those who don't already know, CATHETA means learning in Creek, and in that respect, today we'll be learning about tribal housing professionalism and your interview skills with Marie Bonville. Note that this is part 2 of a 3-webinar series. We had one yesterday on resume skills, and there will be another one tomorrow, same time, on skills for your first 90 days. My name is Brooke. I'm the Training and Development Specialist here at the Native Learning Center, and we're so happy that you could join us today. If you could follow along while I read the disclaimer aloud, this webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. Please note our copyright law. Anything that you see displayed would be materials that are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws and treaties. Just something to note. Before we get started, I want to familiarize you with some of the features available and how the environment on Adobe works. If you look at the top of your screen, you'll see an icon of either a person with their hand raised or maybe just a hand. And with that icon, you could raise your hand, you could agree, you could disagree, or you could even step away. Now your screen should look similar to this graphic here. To the bottom left, you'll see a box that says Files. Here you'll find some appendix items that go with today's presentation. Please feel free to download a copy for yourself. Just click the item you'd like to download, and then click the arrow pointing downwards to download and save onto your device. Once the item is downloaded, it would appear in your device's download section. The next box over, labeled Web Links, is where you'll find our survey about today's webinar, along with any other links that'll be seen throughout today's presentation. Finally, all the way to the right of the screen, we have a chat box available. This is how you'll communicate with the instructor and us, the NLC staff. So if you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to interact by using the chat box. Just type your message and hit enter, or click the up arrow icon button to submit. We, of course, do encourage class participation, so please feel free to write in those questions and comments. You could put any tech support issues also into the chat box, but know that most of those issues could be solved just by exiting and re-entering the meeting room. Let's all go ahead and try out the chat box together now by typing in your name, where you're joining us from, and your tribal affiliation. All right, folks. With that, it is with great pleasure that I introduce today's webinar instructor, Marie Bonville. And Marie, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to you now.
Awesome. Thank you, Brooke. I appreciate the folks in the room being here for day 2. I'm excited to talk about interview skills, so we'll jump right in. A little bit about myself. I started my career with the Seminole Tribe of Florida in 2007. I held several positions which engaged with education and housing, and specifically the hiring for the purpose of developing tribal members within the departments, right? So I would do job placement and things like that with our students, both in the high school and young adult arena. So a lot of times you don't know what you don't know, and the interview process itself was very stressful for those individuals. So it was great to kind of learn with them all the things necessary to get them to be successful at these job placements, and interviewing skills were a part of that. I currently, moving on, I worked for the Native Learning Center, and that's where I got the bulk of my housing experience and the difficulties of working in an environment that can be stressful from a resource perspective. You're only allotted so much with your IHBG funds, and you're having to make hiring decisions based off of, where you're going to get additional resources. Some of you are housing departments, some of you are housing authorities, most have high turnover just because of the nature of burnout in our world, and some of the frustrating parts that come with affordable housing, for sure. So in terms of what I do now, I'm still working in the area of tribal housing. I also have a construction real estate side of what I do, but the majority of my work is still in Native communities, and I do appreciate the time to be here with you all to talk about these important tools and techniques and things that we need as housing professionals. So what you may have missed was that yesterday we talked about resume skills. I think I see very familiar familiar names in the chat area there. But on the off chance that you're new, what we missed is that we talked about resumes, the formatting of your resume itself, and making sure those sections are clear. Certainly the job description, right? There's the job you think you want, and there's what's available to you. So we talked a little bit about the search itself, because it can get you off track. You can go down a rabbit hole and end up applying for a job that doesn't really meet your skill sets, and or it's not the right fit from a organizational culture perspective. So just thinking about that. If you know your life is kind of hectic and needs flexibility, then certain jobs may or may not be for you. Quantify what you can and use verbs, right? So we talked about the language of resumes, government resumes versus not personal, but private organizations, right? And the tone that needs to be different when dealing with those two options. We also talked about non-governmental organizations as well, so nonprofits, because the benefit of a resume, if you're currently working in a nonprofit, is typically you'll need that to demonstrate capacity when you go to apply for grants and whatnot. So updating your resume is good, even if you don't have a job per se in mind. Being concise, right? There was someone yesterday that talked about the frustration of not knowing how much to say, and that you do want to simplify what you can. So less words, the better. But you also want to make sure that it's relevant to the job you're applying for. So making sure that it's very much tailored to fit the job description, which means that you will have multiple multiple resumes for the different jobs you're applying for. And I know that may seem, if you're the type that is maybe big picture and doesn't really care to, on the admin side, not that organized, let's just say, that can seem daunting as well. But, managing the process, that's what is important. So keeping those files separate, making sure that you're uploading the right file when you go to apply, all of those things matter to be successful. And then, of course, the cover letter, which we talked about developing your resume before you develop the cover letter. This will just ensure that your cover letter, which can be more personal, has the information necessary. And you can't really know that unless you clean up and decide on all the details you want in your resume. So certainly the cover letter is important, and why we talked about it as well. One thing that I noticed is that a lot of times people would submit stuff and then they'd say, "Oh, I forgot." So make sure you're proofreading your resume. You're too far into it to be the only set of eyes. You really do or should get someone else, a trusted friend, maybe a former colleague or something like that, who can review your resume and give you the feedback, because that is going to be your first line of defense in terms of why reasons that resumes get tossed. Typically typos, grammatical errors, formatting issues. I mean, some of that stuff is stuff that you're going to catch when you're writing your resume. Formatting is usually one of those where the resume template isn't allowing you to do certain things, or you're seeing it one way on the screen and when you print it out, it's completely different, right? So just being mindful of that, proofread your resume, print it out, make sure it's ready before you hit submit. But certainly after you've gotten the call that it's time to interview, you want to dust off that resume, make sure that it, for sure it didn't have any typos, because you will have to print several out for your interview. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Keeping track of applications, as I said, you really should manage this opportunity to, demonstrate that you know exactly what position, what resume you sent out, what information was in it, and here's why. When you get that call that the interview it needs to take place, or you get the email, you don't want to scramble, right? You want to be able to say, I know exactly which position this is and who's, what organization is communicating with me. And because you never know, a hiring manager may pick up the phone and call you and tell you that the interview is on, or they may send the email. So just to be on the safe side. Plus, you want that presence of mind so that you can ask questions like, oh, okay, is it possible to get a name of the interviewer? Why is that important? Because you won't want to follow up with a thank you after the interview. And if you have a name, more than likely it'll be the most appropriate person for their department, right? So a lot of times, maybe a hiring manager might be the one calling, but one of their associates is going to do the interview. Uh, at the end of the day, whether you choose to use the interviewer or the hiring manager, that name that they gave you when you ask that question shows presence of mind, and it'll also allow you to have a name to put down on that thank you note. And you can say something like, thanks, Madeline Brenner, you know, thanks, Madeline, and your team, right? If you don't get necessarily the same person. So you got the job interview. Now what, right? That's kind of the big ticket question. Um, in tribal housing, I know that there are going to be positions that you don't have necessarily the experience with it, but you can do the job based on your knowledge, skills, and abilities, right? So a lot of times what happens is that you don't have a pre-interview game. You don't necessarily know all there is to know about housing. So we'll talk about the prep. We'll talk about attire and also research on the company or the organization you're applying for. We'll use either the STAR method. Actually, I'm going to use the CAR method. So that's a little different to answering tough questions, just because I think it's easier to remember. So we'll talk about that. Discuss basic interview and etiquette, types of post-interview follow-up, right? So we're going to go through pretty much the interview process from beginning to end. Additional reasons to understand why the interview process is so important is that on the flip side, you all are working in housing and you never know when you're going to get the call that you need to be in an interview for a new hire. And in that way, what you experience matters, and also how you can prepare yourself for the opportunity to be an interviewer is also important. And it helps you gain positive interactions quickly with an organization, right? So, if I have a positive interview with the person on the other end, when I see them in the hallway, when I go to get drug tested and all of the other things that come with being a new hire, that new hire packet and orientation, you're going to feel that much more comfortable knowing someone in that environment, and that you had a good experience with them. So we also have to look at POV, point of view, right? So what is the interviewer's purpose for the interviewer? Like what is the actual purpose? Or you could say, what is their why? Well, it's to assess the candidate's skills, right? If you're the company, you are there to protect the company or the organization, and hire someone that's going to bring value, right, to the position. So you assess the candidate's skills, their experience. You also want to make sure that the personality and the work style also are balanced, right? And the reason to do that is because they definitely want to make sure that it's going to be the right fit for the culture of the organization, right? To determine the candidate's good fit, they need to make sure that they also give them an understanding about the position itself. So they'll give you certain details to make sure you understand things that maybe didn't present itself in the interview. In the job description. They may say to you, "Well, let me tell you a little bit more about the position." In which case, it's going to be important that you take that into consideration when you make your decision to accept. You could also look at it from the end of this transaction, right? So the point of view of the candidate, what does that look like? What's their why? To learn more about the position, right? You don't know everything there is to know about what this position entails based on the job description, but to also assess the company and whether it's a good fit for your career goals, right? What are some of your long-term goals and interests? A lot of times I would have the candidates write these things down ahead of time, because you don't want to go down under a path that's not right for you. So sometimes with employment, it can be tough because there's also this monetary factor, right? If you are needing a job or an increase in pay, then the motivation may be to accept whatever's provided, right? Whatever's given. And in the case of some positions, after they've given you the information regarding them, it may not be to your best benefit to say yes. So you have to factor in the reality of things, right? And then also to make a good impression, because you never know when, even if you don't get the position, someone may say, you know what, they were not the right fit for this particular position, but we have others that we might want to keep this application on file for, right? And so these interactions can be very valuable in that place and space. I have had it happen where, candidates were sent back and said, hey, we really couldn't move forward with them because we were looking for a specific skill set. And this would be too much in terms of training for us to move forward. Okay, fine. However, a couple months later, I get a call that that person would be a good fit for another position. If they're available, let me know, that type of thing. So it does happen. So preparing for the initial contact, I want to make sure you're updating your voicemail. And most people will be like, who uses voicemail? Hiring managers still will communicate and leave a voicemail message. And so that first line of contact that they get with you, if it's, hey, leave a message at the beep, that's not going to fly. And is it okay? I mean, I think that you had the opportunity to prepare your voicemail, to leave your name, number, and a brief message, and I'll be sure to get back to you. It takes nothing. You can actually have two, and you can set in your settings that for friends and family, it needs to be one. If you don't know or have that contact number saved, it needs to be another. So cleaning out your message inbox as well is important, because if they try to leave a message and there's no voicemail, then you think about the nature of today. Everything is fast. We have 15 different ways to communicate between social media and our text messaging and all these other avenues. And so I think that the hiring manager may move on, especially if it's an entry level position, because they don't have that access to your to leave a message. Now they've got to call you back. What if they don't get back to you, right? So control your controllables and update your voicemail, clean out your messages. Same is true of your email. Clean that up as best you can so you don't miss an email from a hiring manager. With your social media, the best practice is to just be careful with it. And I will talk a little bit about it later, but you do want to clean it up. And you might say, some folks feel like, well, it's my personal information. Well, yes, but it is out in the public arena, in a public forum. You can't necessarily think that a person may or may not choose to evaluate your social media in order to protect their organization, right? So just be mindful of that. Business attire. Certainly we want some people think, okay, I'm getting an interview, time to go buy a new outfit, right? But maybe you're not going to be as comfortable in that new outfit. So we'll talk about attire and selecting the right look for you. But I do want to stress the fact that sometimes what you have in your closet, because it'll make you feel more comfortable, you're going to be in an awkward dynamic getting interviewed, and there's all this extra stress. So when you add a new outfit to that, your body might not naturally feel comfortable. So just thinking about that is important. So as I said before, voicemail, all that information is there. State your name and contact information clearly. Be polite and friendly. Let callers know that you're away and you'll return their call. And so there's an example for you to build one. Email signatures. So if it's an email notification that you have been selected for an interview, I will say this: sometimes those messages can be automated. In which case, it'll either express that in the email itself, or when you send the email, you'll get a bounce back notification, right? So sometimes that happens. But if it is an individual, I would say it's always best to acknowledge that you're in receipt of the invitation, right? So in the email signature, or in the email to begin with, you want to make sure that you're thanking them for the interview, and then again, your signature itself, even if you don't have an automated one, go in Word, make a document with something that has your name and your contact information. No nicknames or anything like that, no unprofessional email addresses, but make sure that your signature is concise. And I say that because they don't always look that great, when it's, compared to professional email signatures that you can maybe get or pay for. Canva, which I mentioned before in the last training, is a great tool to help you develop an email signature. Word obviously has templates that you can choose from as well. but avoid flashy fonts and formatting. I will say that. Test your signature links to make sure that they all work. So, for example, you might want to put your LinkedIn access at that in that email signature, but what's the point of it if it doesn't work, right? So just be mindful of that. And I will say we've had great strides in compatibility. Oftentimes what you send looks exactly like what people receive on our other end. It used to be that, you thought something was cute or catchy or, fun looking. And then when the person gets it, it's all over the email and it doesn't look the right way. But I will say, we're talking about a professional setting. So you want less of that. So again, less is more. Your name, your contact information, your email address, and then the LinkedIn profile if you so choose. And we're going to talk about LinkedIn in a little bit now because we're here at social media. So check your privacy settings, right? You may not know that everything is public, right? And choose to change those settings to it being just friends and family. Posting inappropriate content, of course. What's inappropriate, right? These days, it seems like it's in the eye of the beholder. But I will say that anything that you find that is found to be sexually suggestive, violent, or offensive, typically the things that are uh, also located in the language that's inappropriate for the workplace is what you're going to want to make sure is removed. And it could be that you're not necessarily, for example, there was that incident in Alabama with the chairs and the people, the boating accident situation. People were sharing that information on social media, and so it wasn't necessarily something was shared to a page, in which case it's not you specifically sharing that content. However, the fact that it's on your page may be enough for them to make a connection that's not there, right? So there's just one example of just cleaning it up for the purpose of I'm in the job interview, I'm in the job hunt, and I want to make sure that I put my best foot forward, right? So it may not even be your content or something you're commenting on, but if it's posted to your account, then it's fair game. Complaining about your current job or employer. This is a big one, right? Why are you looking for a job in the first place? Well, if it's all over your Facebook, why? Then that could be a problem as well. So just be mindful of that. It's a red flag to the employer that you either look unprofessional or ungrateful or a combination of the both of the two, because that's your current employer and that's your current um, organization, and what look it now gives on their end of the equation is what they're thinking. Most interviewers are of the assumption that past performance will dictate future behavior. And so if that's the case, then what they see on your social media may be how they perceive you'll move forward with them as well. Well, of course, there's oversharing, right? Of personal information and being negative and pessimistic. Now, you all have also encountered, I'm sure, individuals on Facebook or Instagram or wherever that you feel it's oversharing, but to them, it's totally fine. And again, these things are nuanced. What's negative to you may not seem that negative to them. So I would just say be careful. The benefits of LinkedIn is that it's an online network for business professionals. And I told you yesterday we would get more involved in it today. But 93% of recruiters are using LinkedIn to find their future employees. 100% of those same recruiters use it to initially screen applicants as well. So it's a really good jumping point. And in native housing specifically, or that the industry of supporting affordable housing activities, in housing, in the communities we serve, that's a pretty small. It's a large group, but it's also a small group where you do find that that applicants know each other and they know their EDs and things like that, their executive directors and whatnot. So it's a small world in some ways with what we do, and therefore LinkedIn can be very helpful as a result, because you are admins and occupancy, you are maintenance, you are an executive director for your organization. Regardless of the position, there's someone doing what you're doing somewhere else. right? And so, sometimes you do feel like you're kind of on your own or in your own silo. It's nice to be able to reach out to and contact someone and say, hey, I actually do the work that I do for, let's see here, use somebody, Colorado River Indian tribes, right? If I have that same position that Madeline has, I may want to connect with you and say, have you ever used this vendor before? Sometimes they're not necessarily on the banned list, but that doesn't make them a good vendor for our organization. So just having that networking ability is big. And training dollars are small. Like it used to be network when you go to these HUD trainings, HUD sponsored, ONAP sponsored trainings. And now with training dollars being what they are, we're less likely to do that, right? So how can you network and find people who are in the same positions and in the same industry as you? LinkedIn's a really good place. Talked about it yesterday. They have 3 new members per second. In case you missed it, 900 million users worldwide. 202 of those 900 million are in the US. 16% log in every day. Um, I turned off my notifications, if I'm honest, because I just, I have a lot of notifications with the different apps and it was just one too many. I have set it to check every week because I want to make sure I'm getting and interacting with folks. So and I do go on it more often than not, than most, I would imagine, but I just didn't need them to notify me. I could do that on my own. Uh, that means that 141 million people every day are logging in. Uh, and then this was a good takeaway that 50% of LinkedIn users take home more than $75,000 per year. So if you're in a position where you are middle management, you want to know what other positions are like, what other positions require certain skill sets, what do those look like? Well, I mean, everything is just handed to you on a platter. Like it's great to say, okay, well, here's the ED for XYZ organization. Let's look and see what skill sets they've had, what former positions they've had. And it's not snooping in the way of this is public, this is information they've chosen to provide, and you're actually connected via LinkedIn. So when they accept your invitation, then they're accepting the ability for you to be able to see that information. So I'll leave that there. And this is why LinkedIn is so helpful because it can increase your visibility, right? Who you are, what you do. It creates outlets to gain, not in this case, not new leads necessarily. Leads is that term for getting clients. So it's not so much a lead as it is getting new, getting access to new colleagues, folks outside of your organization, and also inside your organization as well. Connect you with vendors, both past and future. So that's a good thing because sometimes we lose contact. There were years ago, it used to be you leave an organization and you pretty much lose contact with all these people that you had great interactions with. Well, due to the fact that they can see you and you can see them, those networks get smaller and smaller and they start to reconnect with you as a result. Just like any social media, the algorithms are strong, right? And because of that, they kind of can tell, okay, she used to work at this organization. This person used to work at this organization. Maybe there's a connection there. And they'll suggest networking with different people. Of course, you build a brand in yourself. And so that's also helpful. I'll talk about that here in a minute. And then you establish leadership in terms of your knowledge. Remember that the interview setting itself is a way for you to demonstrate your knowledge, skills, and ability. So your LinkedIn gives folks an idea that you understand the industry and things that are happening to the industry. So, for example, when interest rates started to hike, those sort of how it's going to affect affordability. When enterprise posts something like that, I want to listen to it. I want to read it. I want when Indian Collective has a new grant that might assist with down payment, right? Affordability is high. My clients need some affordable assistance, right? And you typically they're small amounts. This was a pretty considerable amount. Well, I knew that only because I had followed their page, and I knew that this was a program that they were launching. I also had access to individuals within the organization, so I could ask additional questions, or it helps you establish yourself as someone who's paying attention to the industry. And so that's why it's really important. So building your profile out is a process, and I want to make sure you understand that this isn't something you need to be doing like the day before your interview, right? You really want to. This is something that's built over time. So you're going to have to take some time, even if you haven't started interviewing just yet, to build out this profile. Don't make anything public yet, because every time you make a change, for example, if you're new and you add employment history, if you're already connected with people, it's going to start telling them, hey, this Marie DeFore has left Seminole Tribe of Florida and is now working for Dry Creek Rancheria, right? So just think about that before you hit publish, because much like a website, once it goes live, then people can start to get notified. And so it gets kind of old when the information is just, the standard stuff, right? You want them to get notified when you actually have something new to say. The secret to a strong LinkedIn profile, the first is to know that it's in addition to your resume. You do need to have them both. I think in 2023, it's essential to have a LinkedIn profile. It creates a strong social media presence. It's not copying and pasting your resume. So I will say that you need to do some work on that end to make sure that it's different. It can be a little bit more personal. You should use it like a marketing tool, but also know that uh, with any marketing, it's got to look the part, right? So your background image, your headshot, we'll talk about headline. What is it exactly? The summary page or a section, I should say. The work experience, the education, and the endorsements. These are the things we're going to go through next. So the first thing is the photo. You want to choose something professional. If you have a company profile already, you can, as long as they're okay with that, I would ask for permission or make sure that the management knows that you're going to use your team's profile, or picture. But typically that's okay. I have seen it done. But if it's got your company's logo on it or something like that, you want to make sure that that's okay with them. The summary itself explains why someone would want to do business with you. It's pretty much your elevator pitch. If you've never heard of an elevator pitch, it's the idea that you're walking in an elevator and someone asks you, "What do you do? What would you say? What would it look like?" And it also has to be a little enticing because you want them to take a closer look. Your experience, explain what you've done, and why you can't, and what you can do, right? So the what you can do is the most important part to that, because your skill sets may mean that you have a title, but there are other positions that may that you would be good at. So it's worth demonstrating that as well. Interest groups and associations. This is a huge element, and we have a lot today on associations to talk about, because going back to the industry part of this, if you're a part of professional organizations, it can only grow your knowledge of the industry. Professional associations are important. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And then lastly, endorsements. You know what? I just realized it's going to be tomorrow. Spoiler alert. We're going to talk about associations tomorrow, because certainly if you want to, once you get the job, you want to make sure that associations are something that can be a great source of learning. They've got tons of CE, continuing education, that you can take part of. And typically, if you're a member, it's free. So it's another reason to do it. Your profile is your online's first impression, your job first impression. So the priorities, if you're overwhelmed already with LinkedIn as I talk, here's what you need to do: the headline, the summary, and the experience. I'm even giving you a cheat sheet there. Just use that space effectively if you can't do all the other things I mentioned. As I said, the elevator pitch, it's usually 100, well, it can only be 120 characters or less. And it tells you a little bit about yourself. It should entice readers to click the profile and learn more about you, because they're only getting small sections of recommendations. And so, when they see you, they'll see your profile picture, they'll see, your location and whatever job you currently hold, right? Your most relevant. And then, of course, that about you section is next. So in the summary section, this can be much more detailed, right? 2,000 characters. You can add personality. You can optimize search terms, right? Use things that are key phrases in your industry. So I would put NAHASDA in there. I'd put grants management in there, things like that. Let's see here. Who is from a location for sure? If you're an expert in certain areas based on where you live, then you would want to put that in there as well. And then inspire action from readers to connect, right? Because that's the idea. You want to entice them to connect. So LinkedIn profiles with headshots receive roughly 14 times more profile views and 36 times more likely to receive a LinkedIn message. So what does that say? That it's important to have a profile picture. The same is true of written word versus video these days. Remember, we've got to look at the bigger picture. People's attention spans have become shorter and shorter and shorter. And so although LinkedIn is a professional site, there are also busy people doing other things as well, that it's good to kind of keep it short, to the point, and your headshot needs to scream what you do and who you are in one fell swoop, right? So in this one on the right, I'm pretty much a realtor, and I look like one. On the left, the shorter one is just a headshot, and it can be used for anything. I think in the one at the bottom, I've used that for when someone's needing a bio or something like that, and it has like mom life or something, like, I've used it for board work and things like that to show the sections that are more personal in nature, because I'm not wearing necessarily something that screams executive director, right? So the added value is that I am part of several organizations, several boards. I have leadership roles in those associations, so I have that as well, right? So the value part of this is that you might be going to NIAC, right? You might be going to the res conferences for economic development. If you're out and about doing these things, take pictures so that you can put them on your LinkedIn. So you can tell folks where you are, right? I had a conversation the other day via LinkedIn with an individual. We connected. He said he was going to be at the legal symposium, and he provided for NAHC, which is Native American Indian Housing Council. American Indian Housing Council. Sometimes these acronyms, gotta make sure it's right. But once we connected, he let me know that he was going to be speaking at the event, and that I should check out his session, right? And so he provided that information. Now, maybe the agenda hasn't come out yet. Maybe it has. I don't know. I didn't. That's not the point. The cool thing is now I have a connection that I didn't have before, right? And I may check out his session because it's of value to my clients. When you're listing your experience, these are the kind of things you want to either do or avoid, right? So avoid listing only duties and responsibilities because it's boring. I mean, I know that there is a lot of what we do that's not necessarily sexy, but I do think that listing only duties and responsibilities, there's so much more to the position that you currently hold. That use the action words that I've provided on the left. So in the files section, you're going to see action verbs for resumes. Use those action words to highlight your accomplishments. Get interesting, list projects, organizations, classes that you've taken, certifications, right? I've got Pathways Home certification. I've got, Building Native Communities through OESTA. I've got Enterprise and their tribal leadership certification. Use those to your advantage, right? See who was in your cohort. Connect with them via LinkedIn and tell them, hey, I'm glad we met at this training, at this conference. I'd like to connect with you via LinkedIn. Of course, you want to put the most relevant experience on top, just like a resume. But 41% of hiring managers consider volunteer experience equally as valuable. So if you are saying to yourself, well, I don't actually have as much experience just yet. I'm new to this environment. That's okay. Put your volunteer experience. Asking to connect with someone is like a business card. Create a short and friendly interaction. So there is a messaging tool that can say, okay, when I connect with them, this is what I want to say. So you can choose to personalize it or you can make it generic. Know that if it's generic, people are less likely to engage with it than something that was written personally for them. Think about it like this. When I say Kay, or if I screamed out Elizabeth, automatically those individuals just perked up because I said their name. And the same is true of a personal contact. You know, if I walked into a room and saw you and didn't say anything, that would be awkward, right? The same is true of online engagements. If I interact with you, but I don't actually, if my system is connecting with you, but I personally don't interact with you, it's going to be super awkward when the time does come that I need information and I try to connect with you then. So it's always good to kind of put your personal touch on it. And the other thing is what you do grows your network. So this is what we didn't get to go into last class, but essentially, once you start working for certain organizations or with certain organizations, then their network will help you identify new individuals to connect with, right? So of course, I went to Florida International. I worked with the Seminole Tribe of Florida. Those two were on there. I actually got contacted by the executive director of the housing authority at Dry Creek via a webinar I provided training on. He came to the webinar. He went through the training. I guess he liked the content. But the funny thing is, that wasn't the way in which I got contacted. It was via LinkedIn. He went to my LinkedIn, saw it there, saw my contact information there, and that's how I ended up getting the work of supporting their homeownership education trainings via that avenue, right? An avenue I wouldn't have had if maybe, I don't know, maybe the email at the end of the webinar went too fast and he didn't catch it, or he could have maybe gone the route of connecting with the Native Learning Center, but that's a lot of work, right? Yesterday I said it's work to find work. People, you want to make it easy for folks to connect with you. So if they interact with you, they think you're great, and they want to connect via LinkedIn, then that's great, because then they'll have an opportunity to connect with you in the future. Same is true of South Dakota Native Homeownership Coalition. That coalition is not just tribal housing authorities, but it's housing partners. So through that network of individuals, my LinkedIn also grew exponentially because of that. So just being mindful of association work and coalitions and how they can also assist in your development as a professional. So to connect, seek out current employers, clients, friends, professional connections. I think with friends, a lot of times our environment, we're a small network, small group, and so our colleagues become our friends. Now, with LinkedIn, be mindful of that. Sometimes we connect with family on LinkedIn, and it doesn't really serve the purpose of LinkedIn. I will say that um, there are only a certain number of friends or networks you can make on LinkedIn, connections you can make on LinkedIn. So, if the friend is not going to be offended by you not accepting it or something along those lines, try to minimize the amount of friends you have on there. Introduce contacts to one another. I've done that as well. Somebody, will go to my LinkedIn and say, "Hey, do you know anybody who works with VITA or the tax, as far as that goes? Or maybe, do you know anybody who's worked in trauma informed counseling or care for housing? I have something that there's a training I want to be able to provide. I personally don't provide that training, but I know who might, right? So introducing contacts to others is another good part of this. And then engaging and endorsing folks. Endorsing, what do I mean by that? I might know that Nancy works at NWIHA, and so I know what her skill sets look like, and I'll endorse the fact that she has public speaking abilities, or that she is great at organizational management, or that she is a great supervisor, or all the different ways in which I can confirm that she is who she says she is. So endorsements are really great, and a great tool to use. The thing about LinkedIn is the more you give it, the more you get, right? So you really do have to build out your profile, which is why I think it's really important to take time with it and not kind of like try to dress it up overnight. Think about it like this: a Christmas tree always looks better, or any sort of decorations that you do in a house, over time versus trying to do it all at once. And the same is true with LinkedIn. In terms of the interview itself, this is how you need to prepare for a thoughtful interview. First, the employer research. Why did we talk about LinkedIn first? Because you can get this information from LinkedIn. That's the neat thing about it. The Seminole Tribe of Florida has a page. You can go to it, see what's of value there that enhances your understanding of them and their culture, right? The company history, achievements. When the museum at Atatiki got their Smithsonian certification, that was a big deal. It was on there, and I was able to see that. I could congratulate them on that, and certain colleagues that I know in that particular department or section of the tribe that maybe I don't interact with every day. But now I understand their mission, their mission statement, their vision, right? I'm looking at their goals. I know where it's located, right? If this is a position that's outside of where I would normally live or work, then for sure I need to do my research. How well is the company doing financially? You can get that from annual performance reports, for example. What is it like working for the company? You can get that information as well. Number of employees, employee rating, and that brings me to Glassdoor. So Glassdoor is another job search portal. It was kind of created by former employees to basically give non-employees an idea of what this company is all about and provide that information, hence the idea of Glassdoor. But since then, it's grown to be valuable for the organizations as well to give you information and have the employees rate them. So that's helpful. And then, of course, Indeed is another place you can go for information on positions, right? So, for example, you might see that a tribe is hiring for a research assistant or something. And so when you go to that particular profile to see more about that position, you might decide to go to Indeed and see if that position, those descriptions match up with the rest of the industry. Maybe there's some things that the that your search will net, right? Things that aren't on the current description that are now on Indeed, and you can add those, right? So you're kind of evaluating it from start to finish. That wasn't as clear as I wanted it to be, but essentially, when you're looking at two different versions of the same position, you can kind of assess it to determine, well, what aligns with both of these? What can I highlight that align with both of these? And that'll help you, hopefully. Before the interview, of course, you want to make copies of your resume because you don't know how many interviewers might be in the room. I have had it happen where folks have knocked on my door and said, "Hey, Marie, you mind sitting in on this interview?" You would hope that there's a little bit more preparation, but sometimes the workday doesn't always give you as many hours as you want. And so in that case, I've got to go ahead and be in this presentation or this interview, and the interviewer, because they've made copies, I now have a copy of their resume. So people take those types of things into consideration, that they were prepared. Formulate and practice a clear and concise summary of your skills and qualifications. Certainly, we don't want you reading off your resume, but for sure, no, there's a difference between folks who are confident and folks that are not confident in what they're trying to convey. Calling references ahead of time is essential because once I leave the interview, you're top of mind. I want to go ahead and call these references and get this over with, right? If you're a good fit and that's what the interviewer believes, then that's their next step. And if those references aren't ready and don't know they're going to get called or emailed, then it's going to delay your application. Because a lot of times they don't want to be caught off guard either. They want to be able to have the things they want to say about you readily available. Look up the exact building location. Get creative. I went the day before. So this would have been, I'm dating myself, in 2007. I went to it was the Dorothy Scott building and I wanted to make sure that I was in the right place. So the GPS took me to headquarters, tribal headquarters. We all know that sometimes your tribal headquarters is the location that everyone gets, whereas your building and your office is completely separate. And in this particular case, my interview was happening at the education office. I didn't know any of this about the organization. To ensure that I wasn't late, I drove there ahead of time. Of course, there was a security guard. I explained to the security guard that I have an interview on such and such date and that I wanted to make sure that I had the correct location, and they let me in. Of course, they notified the building that somebody would be driving through the parking lot. I assured them I wouldn't go into the building, but I had a better idea that there was a security guard that would have made me, if I'm running late, a security guard will make me late. Moreover, there'd be 4 cars before I get to the security guard. So think about the stress levels that I just brought down by being there ahead of time, knowing where I was going. Some of these locations are going to be remote. So do a dry run to troubleshoot school zones, parking. As I said before, that security guard threw me off. I didn't even know they had that, right? Other obstacles that might make it harder for you to get to the interview on time. In terms of interview attire, so this is a beautiful collage of the NCAI the their last conference, and this is a professional conference talking about business development in Indian communities. And so this is Indian country on display, right? Professionals that are discussing all these different topics. And so the fact of the matter is that Native leaders have always provided a way of knowing how to dress for the workplace without it sacrificing cultural integrity, right? There is a balance. You don't need to omit culture. That's not the point of this section to say be like everyone else. But there is business formal attire, and this is what it looks like, right? So hair and makeup and accessories are typically the kind of thing you want to be comfortable with. So a lot of times new jewelry could be clunky. You put it on a desk or and it makes noise. So just being mindful of what's comfortable, right? New is not always best when it comes to the things you're adding to your interview attire. Choose a hairstyle that makes that and makeup that make you feel comfortable for sure, but avoid being excessive with these things as well in terms of cologne and perfumes. There's a lot of people that it triggers headaches and things like that. So be mindful of the people around you and those that are going to be interacting with you, that you don't want that to be a distraction. Avoid anything flashy or over the top, because this more than likely you're not in a creative setting. And when I say it's not that tribal housing is not creative, but you're not in fashion design, you're not in retail or an industry that's going to require um, you to maybe display some of that. No backpacks or large bags, just because I also think notepads, pens, they get lost in those things. So be mindful of just, keeping it to a reasonable size is helpful. The more you put in the bag, the more it's going to get lost in the bag. Um, Business dress, of course, unless they explicitly tell you um, to dress more casual, think like Silicon Valley. Google set the precedent for people coming to work in khakis and shorts and jeans and casual Friday and having that look. But in most cases, for an interview, it is always going to be business attire is the expectation. And then when it comes to your dress suits and dresses, again, new is not always best. Dress shirts, blazers, blouse, cardigans, those types of things are timeless. Starched and pressed, of course, if you have something cultural that you'd prefer to wear that makes you feel comfortable. I've seen skirts, things of that nature. Feel free to do that. Just know that you want to make sure that it adds to your confidence level and that you feel comfortable in your own skin. So, and why? Because 7% of what we say is how this goes, like in terms of interaction with people, right? People are listening to what we say, but the quality of our voice and our overall confidence, 38% of people say that that's more important. And 55% of people say that the way we dress, act, walk through the door, that's most important to making a first impression. So if that's the case and you're not comfortable, then you're already off to a poor start. So, I had to add fist bump because of COVID. Of course, we would always start with a handshake, but that has now changed. And so I would say let the interviewer make the first suggestion. So if they're reaching out to give you a handshake, then give them a handshake. I'm sure in most offices there's um, hand sanitizer, within reach. It's just the nature of how we live today. So, but if they give you the fist bump, give them the fist bump, or the elbow, or whatever the way in which they decide to communicate with you, you can return that. Of course, eye contact, you want to give them that. Your posture, you be mindful of it. Hand gestures, depending on where you live in the country, hand gestures are usually either really, really big, or maybe it's a personality thing. I don't know. But everyone loves a smile. And so if you start with a smile, I think you'll be in a good place. Some people get so nervous, they forget to just, interact with people on a human level. And so a smile will beget a smile. Never be late. That is my, one rule. Um, is that most interviewers have a zero tolerance on being late. Because it just costs. There's so much time to get this right in terms of interviewing people. That could be the only day they scheduled for it, and then from there they're moving on with all the rest that's on their plate. So showing up late may cost you the job. Getting to an interview no more than 15 minutes early is important. I have seen people kind of go the opposite route and just get there, first thing in the morning, even though they have a 12 o'clock appointment, or 11:30 or whatever it is. So just be careful with that, because there's receptionists, there's other people involved in this, and there's other people maybe showing up to the interview before you. So I would say, as a best practice, try not to get there too early, but never late for sure. I'm going to go ahead and see if there are any questions in the chat area for me. But now we're going to talk about interview settings, because you do need to prepare for the phone interview, the video, the panel, the lunch interview, and the one-on-one. So we're really taking a deep dive into the interview types, and how to make sure that they're successful. So typically, if you're taking a phone interview, it's also a screening method. So they'll start there, knowing that they'll have to bring you in as well. And these are short, usually less than 30 minutes. Could be as short as 10 minutes. So don't get offended by that. Again, think about it from the interviewer's perspective. We talked yesterday about the sheer number of applications that get received for one job, anywhere between 20 and 30 applications. So you can imagine that, on their end, they just need to see if you're a good fit via over the phone, and then they'll take it on to the next round. But during the phone interview, listen carefully. There is such a thing as active listening. Hopefully, everybody's active listening at your offices there. As I say this, because sometimes you can get drowned out, right? You're doing two things at once. Maybe you're listening to me, but you're also responding to an email real quick, right? So think about active listening, that opportunity for you to really hone in on what the interviewer is saying. I have had it happen where folks zone out. Smile over the phone, because people can hear it. And this is just one of those untold or it's something you can hear. You just know when someone's happy to answer the questions, to be there, to have an opportunity. So smile over the phone. If you have a web portfolio, or if there's some additional information you want to provide, either whether it's a LinkedIn profile, or in the case of web portfolio, it's usually if you're in, for example, writing samples, grant samples, if you're good at grant writing, things like that, that you want to provide, ask the interviewer about it and whether or not it's possible to get that to them as well. End the call effectively with saying, "Thank you, I appreciate your time." In regards to the position itself, maybe there's some more information you want. So you can ask over the phone, but you won't be able to do that if you're not prepared, right? So in regards to the virtual interview, 43% of candidates think video interviews cause more stress. myself included, just because I do this for a living doesn't mean it doesn't stress me out. Talking to people in large settings is something that I've learned to love, but it can be stressful. But 65% of professionals also agree that the impression that you make online is just as important as the one you make in person. So this is why it's important to take virtual interviews seriously and make sure you understand the platform, right? So this is just the snippet of all the different platforms that are out there. And I'm not telling you to make sure you understand all of them, but once the interviewer, let's say it's a phone screen, and they say, "Okay, we'd like to move forward with a virtual interview. We'll provide you with that information." You can say, "Great. Is this a platform that I need to download? Will that information be sent in the email as well?" These are the types of questions you can ask. It just helps with you feeling comfortable, right? If you're able to ask that question. Location. So of course, there are these virtual backgrounds that everyone has adopted via Zoom. There's tons of and where they may look professional. Sometimes it's best to just go with a blank white wall, plain white wall with, or maybe something that has a plant in the background, nothing too crazy, but make sure it's not just your face that's on camera. Framing yourself up against from the waist up is important because nobody just wants to see your head. The other thing I would say is you want to tilt your screen, make sure that you aren't um, they're not it doesn't look like they're looking up at you. The only way to really do this effectively is to get on Zoom with a colleague, a friend, a family member, someone who's going to tell you that angle looks weird, right? I think we're all close personal friends now. And I would tell you ahead of time, hey, uh, that's a funny angle that you've got. Kind of twist your laptop this way or that way, right? Um, Making eye contact is important. That little white dot is showing you talking to the person. People tend to shy away from it. They don't want to look directly at the camera. But think about what this looks like on the other end. One of the, I don't want to say benefits, because certainly the pandemic had, is just a negative all around. But I will say that, because of our use of Zoom and because of our use of technology, we have gotten much, much better at looking directly at the camera. Social media has helped with that as well, with, not just the selfies, but the videos and the increase in videos. I now get what's called video emails, and so it's that it's a plug-in to their email where they record themselves asking whatever question. And I'm more likely to play it because then I don't have to read. And I know that sounds bad, but it's the truth. And so looking at the camera, although we're comfortable with it, practice it. Make sure that you're speaking in a conversational tone. I haven't lost my energy, and I've been talking for an hour at this point. I have to be mindful of my energy because what I put out there you all will feel. This is what I meant about smiling over the phone, or um, you know giving a smile to someone, is that they can hear it in return, and that energy level has to stay throughout. I have seen it and felt it when an interviewer, um, or interviewee, I should say, has lost their energy. So taking time to respond. This is a big one, right? So you may not have the answer right away. And when they ask the question, then you need to take a minute to respond. Uh, so some of the things that I've done in the past is I have brought a water bottle, or if they ask you, would you like a water? I make sure to say yes. And the reason why is I can take a sip before answering. It allows me to kind of reset, think about what I want to say, and say it. The other thing I can do is repeat the question, right? I can say, so if someone were to ask, tell me a time when you had a difficult client, I can say, well, when I had a difficult client, just that ability to restate the question gives me an opportunity to answer. Of course, test all the technology: camera, sound, connection, lights, videos. Certainly, the NLC and I did that before this training. You need to make sure that all of this is taken care of ahead of time. And of course, recording yourself is great because then it gives you an opportunity to be your best critic. Um, Lunch interviews. So sometimes employers decide to have interviews over lunch, especially if this is a position that requires interaction with the public. You'll find that then they'll want to do this for multiple reasons. They want to see how comfortable you are in an environment. If they're taking you to meet stakeholders, clients, things like that, then these social skills are going to be important. Some of the tidbits on lunch interviews is that, of course, you pre-interview, you want to check out the menu and the location, arrive early. You never know what the pitfalls will be with certain restaurants. During the interview itself, making sure that you have your manners on deck, cell phones are on silent, avoid messy foods, right? I mean, who doesn't like spaghetti and meatballs? But that's not the best selection for a lunch interview because it's kind of hard to eat and stay mess free as far as it getting on your clothes, etc. So keep the conversation light and toward the start of the meal, and then it'll eventually go into the conversation on employment. Small bites for conversations to take place is best. Avoid alcohol. The interviewing is tough, and so even if the interviewer suggests it, you can decline. Offer, but let the prospective employer pick up the tab. And this is important as well, that offer, but allow them to do what they came to do, because really that's a part of why they invited you in the first place. So with panel interviews, that now don't assume that they're going to pay, but offer, and then once they've declined your offer, that is typically how it's done. In regards to panel interviews, I'll tell you why they happen in the first place. In some organizations, if they're large enough, they may have a HR specialist or hiring generalist, someone who's going to who protects the organization, right? Works for human resources, and they have a certain set standard list of questions that they ask. What do you know about our organization, right? Things like that. But then there's specifics in regards to your job, your department, and that department may be in the interview as well, so they can ask questions that are relevant to their needs. So, for example, deadlines, staff turnover, project delays. If this is about construction management, for sure, they're going to want to have a conversation with you about project delays, right? Lack of funds or resources. Maybe there's a bit of a panic, right? The department's gone through some sort of finding, right? Their resources are at risk, and so they might ask you questions about that. Irate clients, board members, leadership. Maybe there's interaction that needs to take place between the position that you're applying for and those leadership roles. And so they'll ask you about that. These are things that the HR generalist isn't going to ask you because that's not their day-to-day tasks, right? So they'll invite the department to come in and ask you those tough questions. So when it comes to one-on-one and panel questions, they're pretty much the same in terms of things I want to talk about. So I kind of put them together for that reason. While waiting, make sure you're sitting up straight and attentive. Be cordial to the receptionist because everyone is watching. Be polite, make conversation. When you see the interviewer coming, stand up immediately, smile, make direct eye contact, accept the handshake whenever possible, or the fist bump, whatever it is, and introduce yourself. So some of the questions you're going to interact with are, tell me about a time you've dealt with an angry client. In a teamwork setting, describe a time when you had to work closely with others to accomplish a goal. If this is a leadership position, explain how you have motivated others to complete a task or goal, right? So remember, going back to the STAR method, I decided to go with the CAR method. So the STAR method is situation, task, action, and result. And I thought, there's got to be an easier way. Just one less letter if I can go with it. So we decided to go with CAR, which is circumstance, action, and result. And so essentially, here's what you got to do. So for that question, tell me a time when you dealt with an angry client. Let's say that the client is next on the housing waiting list, and there is a unit available, but it's been several weeks before it's ready, right? So the clients come in your office and they're upset about it. Maybe the action is that you listen closely to their circumstances. You provided them with the additional steps that the organization takes to make sure that the unit is safe and sanitary, and that you reassured them that the process is for their own benefit. Um, you might have even added, I'd personally be willing to give you a call each week to give you the status of the apartment itself, if that's something that you have the ability to do. And the result is that she left with a better understanding of the policies and procedures of the organization. She was satisfied with the service she received, and she was willing to wait for the next unit to be available without further concerns. So the circumstance itself, you need to start to decide which, let's say it's staff turnover. I dealt with a situation where we lost several of our staff, and we needed to hire temps. I decided to move on with the action of that, right? The idea that I was going to work with subject matter experts, bring in the folks that needed to be brought in order to successfully stay on budget or on task, and complete the goal of getting our APR, our annual performance report, completed, right? So the circumstance, the action, the result, you all have tons of that in terms of things you've already put on your resume. You just need to find a circumstance, an action, and a result for each one of those bullet points, so that you feel comfortable delivering that to the interviewer. So the CAR method, I think, is a lot easier to remember than the STAR method. Circumstance, action, and result. Regardless of the job-related competency, you want to make sure that you give them details, right? So I provided that information, but remember I said before, we're in a smaller environment. Like, just by nature of who I work for, you may know who I work with. And so you want to be specific, but I will say that you want to do it without naming names. And so that is something to note, is that they want details. Of course, you don't want to keep it vague, but try to do it without the names. Give successful examples. Past behavior is a good indicator of future performance, as I said. Frequently asked questions. So the most uh, popular questions that are asked in interviews: what is the biggest strength you will bring to our organization? What is a weakness you need to work on? In each case, don't pause, because this first one means that you've evaluated your strengths, you've evaluated your skills, your knowledge, what you bring, the value added that you bring to the organization, and then you've done it ahead of time. So this is more about preparation for the interviewer. When I see somebody who's confident in these questions, I know to automatically send it over to the department, right? Because they've done the generic HR work of feeling confident about the organization. They know what the organization does. It always would bring a smile to my face when someone brings up in what we do. If they've gone to the website and they just saw Seminole Tribe of Florida, they may not have much of an idea. But if they've gone to the Native Learning Center's website, if they know about the primary objectives of NAHASDA, if they've seen our content, they've sat through some of our webinars, then that is something that once they convey that in their answers, I feel more comfortable saying, you know what, let's go to the graphic designer. Maybe it's a position for our marketing and our content, and I want them to ask questions because I can pass it on. So we'll talk about answer ingredients. So an answer should be true and honest, should be relevant to the position you're applying for. Give me an example of how you've used a strength in the past, right? By giving a specific example, you are making your statement credible, right? So they want you to prove to them based on your past experience, but it needs to be true and honest because that's the only way you're going to feel confident about delivering this. The same is true of presentations, and I've said this before in other webinars. If I didn't write this stuff, if I just went on the internet and swiped what I saw, you wouldn't believe me because I wouldn't feel comfortable delivering it. I didn't write it. The same is true of an interview. I know we want to put our best foot forward in our resumes, but you never want to put something that's dishonest. So weaknesses, it just reads funny, should be true and honest as well. Should not relate to the position you are applying. Give an example of a way you tried to improve your weakness through team collaboration or additional training, right? So for example, I am not the most organized. I definitely am great at interacting with the staff and with our stakeholders. I relied on my admins and my and additional staff to help prepare certain reports that I knew were of value to the organization in order for us to succeed in writing our latest Indian Community Development Block Grant, right? Because where I might have the big picture of what I want to do with those funds, I don't have um, the skill set of managing the timeline, right? And I want to make sure that it's done in time, that we've prepared all the sections, and it's a grant that taps into the capacity of so many other programs, right, within our organization, that I wanted to make sure I worked with the team on that. Asking questions is also important. So think about an interviewer asking you, okay, do you have any questions for me? And that awkward pause because you didn't prepare for that question. So here's how you do that. When you ask a question, is this a new position? If yes, how or why is the organization growing? Right? So asking the interviewer questions is also important. Why do you feel that these key skills what are the key skills, excuse me, that are required for this position to succeed, right? So if I'm going to be in this position, what do you feel are the key skills necessary? How does this position help to achieve the organization's mission? Don't be afraid to ask questions that ask the interviewer, why is this position important? Why would this be a good fit for me? Um, don't ask, what is the work schedule, nights and weekends? Typically, those things are going to be available to you um, in in the job description itself. It'll say that this position is full time, so 40 hours a week. It'll say whether it's a nights or weekends, or require nights and weekends. It'll say if it'll require travel, those types of things. But if it does, then don't ask it there. Ask it once you've gotten the job and they've asked for you to accept the offer, right? So at that point, you can say, well, I have some additional questions in regards to the schedule. Why? Because there's something about asking about the schedule, the nights, the weekends, that makes it seem like there's less of a willingness to work. And that may be the case, that you're not able to work nights and weekends, but you need to make sure that the job position you're applying for are a good fit. And in this particular case, if they detailed that in the beginning, then you've just wasted their time now, having had an interview and knowing that you're not able to fit that schedule. Um, your turnover rate. So it is true that in housing, there is a high turnover for various reasons, but asking it during the interview is not appropriate, because oftentimes there isn't enough time to go over why this particular industry is having the sort of turnover it has. But that's not the place for it. What's the pay? You're right now, you're in the interview space. When you negotiate, that'll be after your offer has been provided to you, in which case you'll know the exact pay rate. Oftentimes, organizations have a scale. They'll say, okay, this particular position, depending on where it is, will be, entry level, lower level management, higher level management, executive level management. So in that particular case, this is the pay scale. They want to look at your knowledge, skills, and abilities to determine where you placed on that scale. And there's nothing wrong with the negotiation factor. However, it's not to be done at the interview itself. Closing an interview is simple. What you want to do is make sure you understand what the next steps are. Close like you began, with a smile, make good contact with your eye, and then give a firm handshake, right? So, what about tech? How can tech help you? We talked about it yesterday. The way that the resume prompts work, you can use them to also help with interview skills. So, for example, What are the biggest challenges facing the team in the next year? That's a question that that you can ask your new employer, especially if you know you're going into a team environment. If you're in construction management, there's a lot of folks that are going to be working with you. Program management, there's going to be a lot of folks that work with you to make that program succeed. So it's important to maybe note that as a good question to ask. How does this role contribute to the overall mission of the company? What are the opportunities for growth and development in this role? Can you tell me about the company culture? What are the next steps in the interview process? So these are just some questions that came from my question to AI in regards to interviewee questions to ask. So, and it generated it in under a minute. So it's really neat and helpful. Here are some other questions. So I basically just gave you tons of questions that are that you can anticipate being asked. Tell me about a time when you had to overcome a challenge at work. Describe a time when you went above and beyond your job duties. Give me an example of a time when you had to deal with a difficult client or customer. Tell me about a time when you had to work independently. This is a good one. And a time when you had to work as a part of a team. Tell me about a time when you had to work with someone who you disagreed with. How did you handle the situation? Situational questions are helpful because it helps you display your experience in addition to talking about a past performance, which we already know demonstrates future behavior. Soft skill questions. How do you handle stress and pressure in the roles that you've had in the past? What are the strengths and weaknesses? How do you stay organized and manage time effectively? How do you handle conflict? You know, if you're going to be the next ED of Isleta del Sur Pueblo, then yeah, for sure, you better be able to handle, interacting in different settings. How do you give and receive feedback? This is a big one. You know, if you've taken any of those generational differences classes, you know, certain generations don't really they're used to the formal feedback given at what is it yearly review time, but feedback for millennials is almost constant. Like we love feedback. We want to know how we can improve, how we can get better. Constant feedback is just it's a helpful tool for some, motivating tool for some of your staff. So how do you give and receive feedback is a really good question. And how do you learn new things? This is talking more about your mindset. So you can say right off the bat, I have a growth mindset. I love to learn and grow and within my role, and also to shadow and learn from others, because as a team I want to make sure that all our bases are covered. How do you work as a part of a team? How do you communicate effectively? These are the questions that demonstrate soft skills. What about motivation questions? What are your professional goals for this role, project, or area of your life? What are the biggest challenges you face in achieving professional goals? How do you see yourself overcoming professional challenges in this role? Right. So sometimes these are more thought provoking questions, and it may be that they're trying to ensure that you are a good fit for the organization based on your goals. What support do you need to achieve your professional goals? How some employers offer college assistance and things of that nature. So you can show your research abilities by letting them know, well, I'm familiar with this particular organization. I understand that there's some room for growth, and also college assistance. So this is where I would like to move, where I feel like we'd be a good fit. How will you know when you've achieved your professional goals? These are thought-provoking questions. And with thought-provoking questions, it's great to take some time, when you're not in the interview, you're not in the running for an interview just yet, to sit down with them and answer honestly, to streamline what you want to say. So the interview exit survey, right? It's important to know that they're also going to ask you questions uh, based on how you felt. Was your interview dressed? Were you dressed appropriately, right? Was your interview dress appropriate or not? Did you feel like there was something you could change? Were you warm and friendly? Were you confident? When you leave the interview, ask yourself these questions, because you'll forget. You will want to forget, and hopefully if it wasn't that bad, but there's a lot of cortisol running through your veins. You're just very anxious, and that energy is high. So take a second to reflect, because you might forget some of these things. Did you show that you can handle the programs or the projects required? Did you project knowledge of the objectives? I remember I interviewed for like an assistant to one of our local senators once. This was right out of, I think I'd already had my first entry level position, but I was just trying to grow, right? So the senator said, "Did you watch the video that I have on my website?" And I said, "Yes, I had." And then he said, "Okay, what are the three things that I mentioned?" No, I'm sorry. First, he asked, did you do you know what committees I'm on?" Which, of course, I researched which committees was on. He's a senator, right? Local senator. And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Okay, great. Did you watch the video?" And I said, "Yes." And I was able to give him the gist of the video, but he was looking for something specific within the video, and I couldn't recall what that one thing was. And that's where it ended, right? He wanted someone who automatically knew that, and that was that. So afterwards, I thought about it and I realized I hadn't actually watched the video in its entirety. Like, I watched it, but going back to listening and active listening, I was worrying about what I was going to wear, and where is it, and all these other things that I hadn't actually like paid much attention to what was being said, throughout this video. So that's one element that I've never made that mistake again. If once I go to a website, I am like all in, because I want to make sure I don't miss anything. And I think I was just too distracted and didn't have, I wasn't focused on uh, that particular element. But I remembered it, and I never forgot how it made me feel to not have that answer. So, did you speak well and to the point? Did you present your qualifications to the best of your abilities? Were you enthusiastic? Did you show determination? These are the kind of things that you need to evaluate. It's why we ask for survey results at the end of every webinar, just so that we can continue to improve. So don't take it personal. Use it as an opportunity for you to get better. Um, be thankful for the experience, because whether or not you get the position, this is enhancing your professional skills. As I said before, that particular senator, it was probably a blessing in disguise, because my schedule and of course their schedules were probably going to be hectic. Send but I was thankful that I took it. I answered some hard questions, and I answered them really well, I thought. So I also highlighted my positives. I knew what went well, and I knew what I needed to improve on. Um, Send thank you notes to the individuals that interviewed you. You'll be surprised. You get thank you notes back, or your welcome notes back, and some of these notes say you did really well, you better than expected. Certainly, there was a candidate that we chose, but there's you have much to be proud of, right? And they'll let you know that in the response. So thanking them for their time and consideration of the position is important. Of course, they can be handwritten or delivered via email. It just would One, you have to have the presence of mind to know where it needs to go next, because it can get lost if you don't address it to anyone, if it's handwritten. And then also make sure it doesn't have any sort of grammar or uh, misspellings and things like that, just because, again, this is a professional correspondence between you and the hiring manager. So some of the interview skill summaries for 2023: be able to articulate your soft skills. It's really important that it's not just your experience that you've had, but also the skill sets that you have in working with others. Preparing your own questions for the interviewer is important. Practicing your answers to common interview questions. I've given you several to look at to make sure you're practicing your answers. Be yourself and be enthusiastic. Be comfortable with virtual interviews. That is a must in 2023. And I will say that, there are tons of resources that are out there. LinkedIn has some. Here I have common interview job questions, this list as well. All of those are going to be in the chat area. And then also the AI. So let's say that next up you're hired, right? This is what we're going to talk about tomorrow, in that we want to talk about that 30, 60, 90 days. 40% of management hires fail within the first 18 months. I think I had the record with a hire that I made back in 2014, 2015. This particular person lasted like 2 weeks. But I'll tell you why tomorrow. Certainly, I think that there's certain things we want to make sure we disclose ahead of our hiring. We want to review the most common mistakes made in the first 90 days, so that way we can accelerate growth. There is a way to grow in every position, and not just externally, right? I'm not saying from one position to another. In the position that you get, there's a way to grow within it that will be of value to both you and your new employer. So for sure, check us out tomorrow. At this time, if there are no other questions, I do want to say thank you for being with me today. And if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat area for sure. If not, then tomorrow for sure. If you forget or head to pillow tonight, you're thinking about it, and you come up with a question, no matter what the content was, both yesterday, today, or tomorrow, you can put it in the chat as well. So let's see here. I'm going to go head over to the chat area and make sure there are no questions for me. No questions today? I know we had a lot to cover, but if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I'll be here for another 5 minutes or so. Can definitely answer anything that comes to mind. Oh, you're very welcome. I appreciate being here. It's always fun to come back and work with family. Let's see here. So I don't know if the NLC, are you taking over now?
Yeah, thanks so much, Marie.
Okay, great. You're welcome.
I did already launch today's feedback survey for you guys. If you could please take a moment to fill that out. It only takes a minute or so. Your feedback really helps us that we can continue the things that are going well. We can tweak the things that are needing it, and we are able to also give that feedback to Marie so she knows what you're liking and what can be improved upon. So we'd appreciate it if you guys took a moment to complete that. Be candid because it is anonymous. And we do invite you to come back tomorrow for Tribal Housing Professionalism Part 3. And just like Marie said, that's going to be on your first 90 days of hire. Remember, registration is always free for our webinars, and we have our times listed here. I'm here in Florida, so it starts at 2 p.m., but obviously that shifts for you folks all over the nation. Feel free to access this and any other recorded webinars online on our website, nativelearningcenter.com. We have a Catheta Webinars tab featuring a recorded webinar section, and you can click on any one of the webinars that we've done for the past 2 years. So feel free to view them, share them with your friends and colleagues. And please also check out our upcoming events posted to our various social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We even have a podcast titled Hope a Thing, a Native American podcast, where we discuss focused topics within tribal housing and self-determination. You can listen on Simplecast, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and you can even watch the video recordings with our guests on YouTube. And once again, everybody, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that we have a chance to connect with you real soon. And remember, same time back tomorrow for Tribal Housing Professionalism Part 3. Thank you again so much, Marie. I will see you tomorrow.